Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review season 1 of The Tick. This show is an Amazon original. If you guys enjoy me talking about this first season, probably eventually I will probably in somewhere down the road get into season 2. So if you guys want to hear my thoughts on season 2, eventually I will get there. But dare say, let me also mention a lot of other things, just in case people do not know that there's Mo than just this show. So, for a lot of people who might not know, who might have just stumbled upon this one drunken night, slipping through the Amazon account, who knows, slipping and dipping through there, dare say, The Tick. The Tick, besides this Amazon original show, also, is a cartoon. There is also another live action Tick show, which ultimately I believe I had seen some episodes, but whatever is coming up from that show is kind of completely jogged out of my memory. So ultimately, I might want to go back and watch that show if people are interested in seeing my insights about the other show. I would welcome going back into that show, rewatching it, and giving you my thoughts. But anyways, this show, I'm gonna, talk about this show in a very cryptic like sense, then give you a double 5 time count, and then after that amount of time, I will get into spoilers. With ultimately one thing that I really want to say about this show, that first off, I really do want to mention that live action can only really do so much. Live action only has such a budget to do things that they just kind of have to come up with kind of practical effects to execute things, or ultimately, the show didn't quite have enough money to quite really go into like the normal Tick kind of scenario of kind of just goofy-esh looking characters and this and that, consistently seeing the Tick really get unleashed and take a lot of like damage and falling and this and that, all kinds of stuff. Anyways, within this show, it really does come down to being called The Tick, but it feels like this first season is more about Arthur, which is the Tick's sidekick. Which I was like, okay, like I can understand how Arthur could be the main focus of this show. I can understand like why he had to have so much of a like much more of a, because this person could be seen as much more of a common man than I guess Tick can really be, because ultimately the Tick is basically almost unstoppable. Anyways, this show is very goofy and is very fun. Very much talking about this in a cryptic like sense. This show is goofy and it's very fun. Even the villain kind of chimes in about saying and doing some goofy things. But I think there is also the one downside about especially this first season is it seems like there is a lot of downtime. There's a lot of two people walking around in an alley. There's a lot of arguments between people in like that's a lot of the show is just people arguing, or kind of villains coming up with their evil plan, or the heroes coming up with their plan, and they got to really sit down and really bang this plan out. They got to really bang it out. Ultimately, I like this show. I just wish that there was more. Like when looking at the Tick cartoon compared to this, is like, gotta remember there's being so much in the Tick show that when like looking at this, it just kind of like it falls flat in comparison. And that is probably just simply because like with a cartoon character like the Tick, like you can really go all out and make this Tick like smash into a lot of walls and do a lot of goofy things. And when he eventually like, um, I remember the Tick on the cartoons being like a person that would like jump from rooftop to rooftop, and I was like, God, this looks so much fun. And how you would just have like the Tick just fight all these weird, bizarrish like I think at one point there was like a superhero like a side character that helped the Tick out at some point. There was a number of just bizarrish looking characters that would help Tick out at some point. They try to kind of do that in this show, but it doesn't quite. It doesn't. It doesn't. It really kind of again just kind of like falls flat. During fact, it just kind of like doesn't quite get there. But again, like this show probably didn't have a big budget. This show was probably the most that was probably put into it was either the CGI or the otherwise like effects that they need to do, or probably paying the actors, because some of the actors had to really do some strenuous ass like stunts going on into this show, which I applaud them for, obviously. So and there is like kind of one character that feels very much like a Boba Fett-ish like character that I really did enjoy like everything about him. Um, like that character is really really cool and really interesting. But sadly enough, like if you weren't familiar with the Tick, you would ultimately say it's like, man, this side character is cooler than these guys are, and this and that. But they're like it's supposed to be like that. They're supposed to be goofy characters. They're supposed to be people that are you're just like looking at them. You're like, what? Like what? Because they don't know any better. Especially Tick in this season does not know any better. So yeah, within this show, I did like the journey of which these people went. There are at times some random things presented within the show to where either the Tick or Arthur has to defeat in their own right. Um, I just was kind of disappointed where it seemed like this whole entire season had one villain to go up against. Like I was kind of disappointed about that. Like I kind of wished that this show um per like per one episode or per every few episodes like give us like a story arc of just like a villain, and kind of per every like 2 or 3 episodes have that story eventually play out. That would honestly be fun. um I just think that the Tick would suffer from having a entire season of one villain, or reasonably, it just has to be the right villain, and I just don't think that the villain that was presented within the show was good enough, was fun enough. But ultimately, I can also see within the show that they were also constrained by probably budget. Again, probably budget. So a lot of the times I can just kind of like shrug my shoulders and say they did the best they could with what money this show had, because it didn't feel like it honestly had a big budget, but you would think it would because Amazon. But especially now, considering Amazon is almost close to like I think making $1 trillion currently to the second this recording, but maybe this show didn't actually get that amount of money going within themselves. So, if anything, if you guys had seen in the previous stuff, especially the Tick cartoon, this show might be disappointing to you. But I ultimately thought that this was just fun enough to win me over. So at the end of the day, I just want to say that this was a good show. I had some good laughs. There were some funny aspects about it. Especially a let's just say boat. If people saw the show know what I'm talking about. Certain kind of boat. It's pretty interesting. Kind of a lot of good times within that boat. You know? So, I think it's about that time to go into spoilers about this show because there's only so many things I can cryptically talk about this show about. Because without a doubt, I can only say like, yeah, some of the actors, good party points on them. Um, it is kind of interesting to have seen how, like, really a lot of people probably either improvise stuff or maybe like how everybody kept a straight face while they were doing what they were doing. Um, because a lot of this stuff was goofy. A lot of this stuff was just kind of like, like, It's like, okay. Anyways, I think it's about that time to get into the double five count. After this amount of time, I will dare say go out of my way to talk about this show in a spoiler. Like, spoiler time! Spoiler time! It's not morphing time. It's about that time again to spoil the show. I wouldn't say ruin the show because I actually liked it. I didn't think that it was a disappointing show. And people could have different opinions about it because, again, they might not be Tick fans, or they might be a big Tick. Who knows? Who knows? So, we go into Arthur and he's sleeping. And while he's sleeping, he is having this tick in his eye. And I'm like, oh my god, did Arthur actually, out of nothing, within his mind, create the tick? Because of his post traumatic experience with him seeing his father die right in front of him because of that space crash. Ultimately, to where the leader of the Terror kind of took credit for his father dying, Arthur's father dying. Did Arthur, through trauma, eventually within his mind create the tick? Or is it just eventually within other seasons them going to relent that it's not actually that way? I don't actually want spoilers for season 2 if people have seen season 2. I'm gonna watch probably season 2 eventually, so hopefully no spoilers. But anyways, we have it to where it is kind of funny to see this character that just kind of pops up out of nowhere and dare say knows nothing about really anything. Like, he knows how to speak English, he knows quasi common sense ish like things, but the Tick is just a for lack of better terms, ignorant person that doesn't know any better. And ultimately, just a lot of times he just likes to smash and crack. He's basically the Hulk. If the Hulk could speak better and could ultimately retain things, and and he does, like, the Tick doesn't talk like a caveman the entire time, but if you've seen this show, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Very much Hulk-like character, but this Hulk-like character does a lot of walking around. Because dare say, I don't think that the Tick fights enough people, or it is kind of funny when he does try and otherwise fight people. He doesn't brutally kill anybody. Because with how strong he is, he could really crush some heads or do some real beating the living crap out of people. But ultimately, that is what Overkill is for. Which I really enjoyed Overkill. I was just like, okay, this is just another bounty hunter character that ultimately is just gonna either get in the way of things, or he's ultimately going to be the guy that otherwise is just another villain, but ultimately he ends up teaming up with the Tick and Arthur. I'm like, all right, hey, cool. And ultimately, this Overkill is so much better at this hero stuff than the Tick and Arthur are. And so ultimately, he has all this gadgets, and he has what is it called, the death boat, or the boat, whatever the boat's name was. To ultimately, I think the boat had like a AI that I think was called like Steve or something. And I thought that interaction with eventually the AI eventually falling for Arthur was kind of funny, to where eventually like they did some like bizarre-ish things in the shower together, the AI and Arthur, which was kind of funny. Led to some awkwardness to where the AI had to admittedly call Arthur and say, hey, I know that could have been like weird and all, like you and me in the shower together, but like there's no hard feelings or whatever. Like the AI had to like convince Arthur that whatever happened in the shower was just like, hey, it's okay and whatever. And Arthur's just like, why am I even listening to this conversation? And to ultimately, like, the AI, when Arthur hangs up, he's like, I love you. It's like, like the AI has a thing for Arthur, bizarrely. But, anyways, we have it to where ultimately Arthur comes in the fray of, let's just say, um a suit that is what he is wearing right now, and that becomes a huge chunk of this season's story. Oddly enough, it seemed like throughout this entire season, it seemed like the Tick suit within the season, if you look at the very like pilot episode, and then you kind of look through like the show as it's like going on, like it seemed like they consistently had to give him different suits. It seems like they consistently had to adjust the way this suit looked for it ultimately look better through as time went on. um Ultimately, I was just trying to figure out like exactly where they were going about this. I think in the beginning of season 2 they do actually mention what is going on with the actual suit, and or why his suit looked differently within the show and or season. um which I did actually kind of like as I started to watch that, because I accidentally went into season 2 instead of season 1. Like I saw like how like the suit tends to look different from time to time, so or whatever the Tick is wearing, whether that's his suit or his body, who knows. So we have it to ultimately, Tick is just trying to go about and try to fight crime, but it ends up that he consistently gets pushed in with this whole terror business. And where Arthur is ultimately trying to get away from the terror because he has the suit that they want. Ultimately, even when he gives them said suit, he ultimately is still the one that can only use the suit. Once Arthur puts on the suit, no one else can use it, can wear it, can do anything with it. To where there, in fact, you eventually have some scientist who, at first, is speaking one certain language within the suit, but then ultimately later on in the season, the suit gets adjusted to fit Arthur much better. Um, there's a whole lot of time of them trying to figure out said suit, and I think that is kind of like the filler of time, the milking out of time within this show. Is the trying to figure out the Arthur suit. Within like I remember the cartoon, a lot of times like no one would be able to figure out what to call Arthur. A lot of times they would just call him like the bunny or some other like I think in the show they call him like Mothman or something like that, which ultimately is like, yeah, I guess they couldn't figure out what to call him. So like ultimately they just like, yeah, Mothman or Bunny or whatever he's supposed to look like. Anyways, I'm wondering when eventually the wings of said Arthur are gonna look a little bit better than what they're looking like. Cause man, those look like very like it doesn't really quite like the overall suit of Arthur just doesn't quite look good enough. It just kind of looks very like extremely makeshift. Um I hope in other seasons, if they go past season 2, which I don't know if they are, the suit looks better because I think in season 2 the suit looks the exact same. Anyways, we have it to where besides Arthur and Tick within this world, we have superheroes that are like Superion, which is basically like the Superman equivalent. We have Overkill, which is much more kind of like a dead shot kind of character. Which again I thought was really cool. I really liked everything about him, even though most of the time he was a douche. Because why wouldn't he be? Uh, because you have to have like the brooding character that ultimately uh people have to be involved with for him to get won over by. Um, and this and that. Funny enough, I do like that Overkill. Like yeah, his whole entire path is about revenge, and to where eventually, once Arthur and Overkill realize that they're both on a journey of revenge, which Arthur is trying to say that like his path isn't revenge, but it's like Overkill's like, yeah, we're both into revenge. We both have revenge to go up against the terror. I'm like, and Arthur's like, no, 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 no. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much what you want to do. Anyways, uh, we do have a very funny cast of like there is a like a superhero dog within this movie that really honestly and truly doesn't do or within the show that doesn't actually really do much of anything. He's just kind of there just to be a talking dog within the show. And I thought that was just kind of like why? Why have him be in the show if he doesn't like do anything but besides being a talking dog? Um I don't know, it just didn't really seem good enough to me. It might have been goofy and whatever. Maybe this show was to kind of maybe barely coincide with kids or something like that. But maybe this is a very family s like show, so maybe that was like the kids equivalent. I don't know. But anyways, you have it to where ultimately the terror or the leader of the terror, uh, and you also have this like pyramid s like team, which was um I think the leader of it was like Ramicles or Ramies, the pyramid group, which I kind of thought was fun, but then I also was just like, again, it was just people, a lot of people in street clothes, and they wore Egyptian tattoos on their face. All you could tell that they were Egyptian esque thugs going up against the Tick at some point. Yeah, you eventually have it to where dare say we have one villain within this kind of villain regime that is kind of like in the middle of the road of a lot of things. She's ultimately like she's not on exactly 100% on the bad side, but she isn't 100% also going out of her way to help the good guys either. There is also like this like double triple agent going on thing with her, where ultimately um she tries to help out the bad, to do bad good, but then also she does things with the good, to ultimately just kind of play the fence sometimes. But then ultimately, overall, she's just kind of looking out for herself and trying to get herself on a higher rung of villainy. Anyways, so you get this terror lord that is ultimately be like, yeah, I'm coming for you. It's like, and everything that he says is like this, and I'm like, and to ultimately, when he like eventually gets into the goofy stuff that he talks, it's like to hear a lot of the stuff goofily said coming out of this kind of voice is kind of funny. Um, to ultimately have a villain that is kind of really playing into the whole like goofy and funny aspect of this show. Uh you have it to where ultimately the everybody is scrambling for this Arthur suit to ultimately like in downtime like the Tick is finding bizarre like things to do like be friends with a homeless person I guess, and that homeless person eventually um makes himself a tinfoil like hat. or mask or whatever you want to call that. It's weird. But eventually we get to the point of where Arthur eventually goes into the terror house and eventually sees the evil master planish man that is ultimately um, fiendishly cleverly trying to be like the guy from Whiplash, where he's ultimately trying to, as fast as possible, play the drums, which is like, I'm like, I guess this is funny, but I also feel like it's filler. Like, I just think it's a filler of time. Like, it looks funny, I guess, but like, it just feels like filler to me. It just feels like filler. It's weird. Like, I wish that he would have like came up with something else. Maybe like, uh, brutally torturing all of his minions, or just kind of bizarrely doing a lot of absurd, like making people do absurd tasks right in front of them that make no sense. But it just he makes it do it. He makes people do it, but just because it's evil and it's villainish or whatever. To bizarrely have somebody whiplashing and throwing like drum pieces at him, telling drum harder, and ultimately the villain, the leader of the terror, just gives up and he's like, I'm tired. Oh, like, I'm tired. Like, like, come on, like, really? Like, you would think that like he'd be up to some evil schemes 24/7. Like like evil doesn't take downtime. So he should be doing some kind of evilish fiend like things, but whatever, I guess. Anyways, so we ultimately find out that eventually Overkill is a leader of a past group, which ultimately, for some bizarre reason, every single one of the group of like past Avenger ish like team was ultimately had all their eyes popped out of their face and a whole bunch of other things, and just like, okay, to where it kind of left Overkill with no eyes and no arms and other things, and eventually he had to go through the bionic man like experiment to eventually get eyes and arms and all this all kind of crazy stuff. Crazy. So ultimately, we get it to where Overkill, the overkillingly less cool thing in this show, with his death boat or whatever you want. I think it was death boat. I think it was. Anyways, with his also bizarrely past trusty sidekick dog that was just a talking dog, which I thought was funny but yet bizarre. Um, we also have it to where Arthur has to consistently be involved with his own family, whether it's being involved with Dot, which was his sister that I think ultimately is gonna eventually tie herself on to Overkill at some point, because it seems like they're winning one another over, even though it seems like there's other relationship tension with Overlord and this other girl, this other woman in the show, which ultimately there's consistent times where every time some other person meets one of those two couple, the like Arthur has to be asked like, hey, did she say something about me? Hey, did he say something about me? It's like, when you saw Overkill, did he say something? It's like, okay, all right, like, yeah, it's funny. And then of course they have this whole back history about them actually being a couple before, and but ultimately there's this bizarrish tension between them, because it's like, yeah, I really want to like come back to this and be with you again, but then also, like, I also don't, because I also want to do my own path and carve my own thing, and like, cuz Overkill just assumes that like that he's just going to get used again by her and this and that and blah blah blah. Anyways, we have it to where Arthur ultimately when I'm kind of all over the place, but this show is kind of all over the place. And I haven't even mentioned the giant naked man that, that ends up being in the show. So we go along and have Arthur being in this prison, in this terror headquarters, and eventually the girl that I mentioned before, that is ultimately trying to get the affections of Overkill, or the affections of the leader of the terror, um, is also just bizarrely more and more just seemingly being affectionate to Arthur. I don't know what the actual game plan is between that. Is just everybody goo goo and gaga for Arthur? What is it? I don't quite understand. It seems like Arthur is the man of this show. I don't know why, but he just is. Maybe he just has this charisma like factor or something like that. This just thing about him that just women just flock to. Maybe that's a part of the cartoon or something like that. I don't know, but I guess it's something. We have it to where Arthur and eventually the tick from time to time ends up fighting like Overkill. He ends up fighting um some pyramid people. Um he ends up eventually trying to go into the Terra headquarters and try to rescue Arthur, but the only problem is that there's a ton of bombs going on within this headquarters because they realize that the heroes are coming to get them. Ultimately leaving all the heroes within a bloody and buried wake of rubble and whatever. But the only problem is that the tick kind of covers Overkill so that way he won't get harmed because the tick is basically undestructible. It is kind of funny when eventually we get to an aspect where the tick ultimately fights a robot that seems to be just like him or looks quasi like him. To where ultimately Tick has to question whether he is a robot, whether he has like his own sense of self and stuff like that, and how and bizarrely he keeps comparing himself to this robot because he doesn't know anything about himself. He just does whatever he needs to do, or needs to whatever Arthur kind of says is what he tends to do, because that's all he knows. The entire time we consistently have Tick consistently trying to figure out what his origin story is, but it just seems like kind of an annoyance. Like to just be like, have this guy consistently question things. I know it's funny, but it also is just kind of like I don't think it's that funny. I just don't like it is kind of funny to have this guy otherwise question everything. But then again, it also like the character does kind of sometimes the tick, if this is supposed to be an Arthur story, it seems like the tick is too much in there, taking too much time away from the story to add in his random esh like things. Uh Within this story, we eventually have to have this show ultimately, climax somewhere. Um ultimately, Superion is thrusted with having to take down this big old giant man who is 100% naked. Because ultimately, the scientist had tried to perform some shrinking ray. So ultimately, there is also a big giant man that ultimately was enlarged. In charge of just bizarrely Godzilla-ing walking around because it doesn't really seem like he does much of anything else. We have to where ultimately Arthur is supposed to eventually try to figure out how to take down said giant man. And because the tick isn't going to exactly just start taking this thing down, it's not quite going to be that way. But, anyways, we have it to where we otherwise realize that after the whole bombing situation and this guy eventually cranking down to normal size, we otherwise find out a few things. We end up finding out that the Arthur suit was eventually to take down an alien race, which was like, interesting. Because what I heard, Superion is the only alien race that is within this place. So, and then ultimately, shortly thereafter, within the season, once Arthur is trying to take down the leader of said terror, he also mentions that he is not trying to, um, like he's not trying to reclaim the world. He's trying to like take back the world, which ultimately makes it so that the villain of this story is actually the hero, and the hero of the story is actually the villain. And supposedly quickly showcasing that Superion might actually be the villain under everyone's noses. Uh, which ultimately they probably could have already have taken Superion down for how like ridiculously ill that he was getting whenever approached by some materials, just like Superman tends to do from time to time. Anyways, so this was an interesting show. I did really like the journeys of which the characters went, but again, it kind of fell flat. I just wish that there was more. But per second season, I'll see what more there is. So at the end of the day, I think that's all that I want to go out of my way to say about this show. I probably still, in spoiler terms, probably said some generic Ash like stuff, but I don't know. I just kind of enjoyed the show for what it was. So I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.